So just before COVID hit, I was finally inching towards the thing that I'd been really chasing since the start of my career in filmmaking, which was becoming a proper commercials director. I was working with my creative partner, Ian, and we were repped by a few London production companies. We were pitching regularly. We were starting to work with bigger brands and getting in kind of bigger rooms, and all the right boxes were being ticked. But if I'd been really honest with myself back then, I didn't really like the work I was doing. I definitely didn't like the process, and I absolutely didn't like how I felt the whole time I was making any of those projects. But at the time, I told myself it must be one of two things. Either I wasn't good enough and I wasn't cut out for this, or this was just the hard bit, and if I doubled down and kept grinding and kept pushing, I was going to get there and things were going to get better and easier just slightly further ahead. So naturally, I chose option 2 and I went kind of full monk mode. More emails, more meetings, more pitch decks, more pitches, just kept my head down, didn't question it, and just kept going. And that's when COVID hit, and overnight, kind of the entire industry stopped. I physically couldn't work anymore. And during that period of forced rest, it became very obvious that this wasn't just, a bad run of jobs or a kind of wobble in my confidence. I was properly burnt out. I wasn't excited by ideas anymore. I was irritated by notes before I'd even read them. And every single job felt like a negotiation rather than any form of a collaboration. So as lockdown continued, I kind of simmered on everything and worked through those thoughts a bit more. And I eventually came to the conclusion that I wasn't falling out of love with filmmaking. I was falling out of love with the industry around it. And I think that those two things get bundled together a lot of the time, but they're not the same thing. And me being able to make that kind of distinction really did end up changing the entire trajectory of where I was to go next. I want to be very, very clear and upfront that this next bit isn't a kind of, all commercials are evil rant, because there are 100% really, really incredible and talented people working in that space. And there is fantastic work being made. But just for me personally, chasing this idea of becoming, a big shot commercials director was slowly stripping away everything I enjoyed about making films in the first place. And I boiled it down to kind of 3 main things. The first one is the culture. Everything felt very performative and people were wearing these big masks all the time. And yes, I know everyone kind of wears a mask all the time in some form, but there was barely an ounce of authenticity with anyone I met or worked with. And relationships felt so transactional, and directors came flavor of the month in one moment, and then you were just sat on a shelf the next. And as a person and a human being, you were useful until you weren't. And whilst it definitely wasn't as bad as what we've been told about kind of old school agency horror stories, the attitudes around work-life balance and ethics and kind of basic human decency sometimes were and still are dated, let's say. The number 2, the process. So pitching, for a start, is a uniquely demoralizing way to spend your finite time on Earth. A lot of the times we were blind pitching, where you had no idea how many other directors were also pitching, sometimes even from the same rep as you, without knowing it. You could spend days of work on a deck that most of the time is barely skimmed through. Agencies can change creative direction mid-pitch. Clients overanalyze absolutely every detail, not from a creative place, but kind of a risk avoidance or brand alignment one. Then if you do actually get booked on something and actually make it to set, because of the need to do extremely detailed and accurate storyboards so much of the time to avoid any kind of misinterpretation or miscommunication, the actual shoots themselves just become ping by numbers, where you're not really directing, you're just sort of executing. And then the edit is exactly the same, where so much is pre-prescribed. Again, it's just sort of tick boxing execution and slightly finessing what you planned already in the first place, rather than any form of exploration or creativity. And then, dear Lord, the endless rounds of notes on microscopic details that didn't really matter, whilst anything kind of genuinely creative or interesting gets slowly chipped away and eroded, is soul destroying. And then lastly, the work itself. At the end of all of that effort, of all of the stress and the pressure and the money and the late nights, you've simply made something designed to sell a product, and the audience doesn't really care. It doesn't leave any sort of lasting impression. It doesn't really mean anything to anyone at all. And some people are absolutely fine with that, and with just thinking about all of this as kind of, a very normal, traditional skill for payment job. Take the money, say thank you, don't overthink it, move on. But personally, I just ended up caring about my work and the craft too much to be able to just switch that off. And over time, that grinds you down, which brings us back to COVID and the project that ended up changing everything. So I think it was towards the end of second lockdown, which I still struggle to believe was an actual real period of human history. My grandma was turning 90, and my family asked if I could make a short documentary about her and her life, because she's had an exceptional life. She grew up during the Blitz in London and was evacuated. She then went on to become one of the UK's first female solicitors and the first female partner of a law firm. And she was then ultimately awarded a CB for her charity work. So it was an absolute no-brainer. And I said yes completely, because it was a life worth telling the story of. And at that point, I hadn't really done anything documentary for quite some years. I dabbled around with documentary in my very early career at some companies, but it wasn't something I ever really took seriously, and it wasn't, where I thought my career was heading. But we kept it very simple. It was one interview day, one day of B-roll with her doing some things, the family, and then a load of kind of archive research of scanning old photos and 8mm film we found of the family, and letters and newspapers and all that. Tiny crew, just me and a DP, and that was it. Very, very basic. But almost immediately, I felt a difference in the process. Because the scale was small, it meant we could move quickly and experiment and change ideas on the fly and try things. And we weren't just chasing coverage or storyboards. We were discovering moments, and we collaborated with my grandma on what the B-roll should be, and she'd suggest scenes, and we'd work things out in real time and work shots out in real time. And there was also kind of a structural freedom where there was this real space to explore and to respond to what was happening. And the same thing was true in the edit, where I felt there was so much room to kind of shape things and sit with moments and enhance the story through areas you hadn't considered before, and really craft emotion instead of just sort of assembling things based on an instruction manual. And without really noticing at first, I fell back in love with the process of filmmaking in a way that I hadn't in so many years. And not only that, then when I obviously showed it to my family at the end, there were, so many tears, and it gave me a proper sense of the true power of what kind of film can do. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really was one of those moments of oh wow, you really can have such a powerful and deep and profound effect on people, and give people an experience and create something that has long-lasting meaning. And I just completely lost sight of all that, chasing this whole kind of commercials direction, and this completely made me reconsider my entire career path based on that. So that was kind of it. I pivoted right into the documentary world from that, and haven't really looked back since. Not because documentaries are a more noble or artistic art form than commercials are, but just from a process perspective, I just enjoy it so much more, and it far more suits who I am and the work that I want to be doing. When I think that the average person spends more than like 30 years of your life kind of cumulatively in work, I just couldn't face the idea of spending a third of my life doing something that I didn't really enjoy and was actively draining me. And I'm much more comfortable now with my voice as a filmmaker and confident in my own filmmaking skills, and honestly genuinely happier because of it. So I think the key lesson in all of this is to look more closely at the kind of process versus product dichotomy in terms of how you're going about your work. And if things are feeling out of place, it doesn't mean that you're failing. It might just mean that you're in the wrong room, and you might not need to, quit filmmaking. You might just need to find ways of reminding you why you loved it in the first place and find a way to get back on a path to follow that passion again. And if that's something that resonates with you, I do kind of talk more about this identity shift and why calling yourself a filmmaker doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's definitely a topic I care a lot about and an ever-growing conversation. But if you are interested in more videos like that kind of delve into the more personal and philosophical areas of filmmaking and film career, I'll leave a link here to another video that I think you probably enjoy about why the kind of word filmmaker has started to lose any sort of meaning or value in the world today.